Coming to the national IPR policy of 2016, this is something that was very important for India to have. So first, let's try to understand what were the needs for this IPR policy and why exactly this is something that was really required in the Indian context. So first of all, when we talk about intellectual property rights, we have seen there have been a lot of controversies that arised because there were some things that were patented somewhere else in the world and that truly belong to Indian heritage and Indian culture. So this is something where we saw that controversies happened. Plus, apart from that, we saw that there were many companies across the world who were taking advantage of the fact that India had patents laws, India had copyright laws, but they were not integrated laws. These were not frameworks which could help the Indian cause. So that's why, so looking at all these aspects, it was required that India should have its own IPR policy and everything should be governed according to these policies. So first of all, redressing any problems, any grievances that might have arisen, any complications that might have arisen due to absence of any such framework. That was one. Apart from that, also to facilitate more research and development in the field so that more protection is provided to the Indian players, to the Indian companies, Indian scientists and researchers. For that also it was required that India should have a framework that allows the Indian scientists and researchers to work better so that they are encouraged to work in this particular segment. Then apart from that, there is another point, and this is very simple to understand, that there should be a legal framework that protects any kind of intellectual property in India. And this legal framework is being provided in a very sturdy manner in this IPR policy. Then what else? Apart from this, you also have to think of the various initiatives that were being taken by the government of India. Startup India, Make in India. For all these things, also Digital India, we needed that we should have a framework, we should have a policy that helps the Indian entrepreneurs, that helps the Indian researchers, the scientists, so that they have the backing of the government so that they can work in a better environment. Then apart from that, there was something else. There are many mega partnerships that are building across the world. You might have heard about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In your economy classes, you might have heard about it. So, to counter these kind of mega arrangements of the world, where they might start to strong arm many of the intellectual properties of the third world countries, so to say, for that also it was required that India should have a good framework that can challenge any of the problems that India might face from these kind of partnerships. So this was also one of the requirements. So broadly, you can say that these 4-5 points summarize why we needed an IPR policy. So let's have a look at the points again. One, there was a need for policy on IPR to institutionalize the process of protection of rights and validation of claims arising out of these issues concerning intellectual property. Then an IPR policy is important for the government as it helps to formulate incentives in the form of tax concessions to encourage research and development and foster innovative spirit in the minds of people. Then the policy on intellectual property rights ensures that there exists a legal framework and there is a level playing field for all the players and participants across the industries. Then, as we discussed, that it will strengthen programs like Make in India, Startup India, Digital India, etc. And then finally, India had been facing fresh challenges from the developed world and mega regional trade agreements like Trans-Pacific Partnership. And for this also, we needed to have a strong support of a framework in India. So that's why these few points summarize why exactly did we need a framework for IPR in India. Then after that, what are the major objectives? Now, the objectives can be thought of arising from the needs that we had, correct? So for example, to safeguard Indian research, to safeguard small farmers, small handicraft workers, so that because they do not know how to file for a patent, how to file for a copyright, so they have to be protected under these kind of laws. So out of the needs come the objectives, correct? So first, spreading awareness on IPRs. More people should know about the IPRs, understand why IPRs are required, what is the benefit that they will get if they are protected under the IPRs. So this is something that is required. So they get a lot of economic benefits, they get a lot of social benefits out of it. Generation of IPRs in India. As we discussed a couple of examples that the IPRs that could very easily would have been patented by someone in India or someone from India was being patented in the USA, was being patented in other countries of the Europe. So understanding of the IPR also becomes important so that we can generate more IPRs in India. And out of these IPRs, definitely a lot of, as we discussed, lot of economic stimulations, a lot of economic benefits, social benefits, cultural benefits can be taken out of it. Then legal and legislative framework, as we discussed, that there was a need for legal framework, and that has been provided via this IPR policy. Then administration and management. So because there is a framework that has been provided now, it becomes easier for the government also to manage the IPRs, to have an administrative control over the Indian IPRs, and in the manner protect Indian cause, protect the Indian IPRs. So for that also a framework has been made, and this framework helps India to protect its intellectual property. Then now that IPRs will be generated, it has a legal framework, it has an administrative framework. Commercialization of these IPRs become easy. A lot of economic benefits can be derived out of it because we have a proper setup, we have a proper academic, administrative, and legal and legislative framework that is available now, and that helps in commercialization of these IPRs and generating more economic value out of it. Then after that, enforcement and adjudication. It helps in strengthening the enforcement and adjudication system. It simply helps in strengthening the enforcement and the adjudication mechanisms for the protection of the IPRs. Then after that, human capital development. Because of the knowledge that we have for the IPRs, we'll be in a position that there are more people who are involved with IPRs, in teaching IPRs, in understanding of the IPRs, in generating more IPRs, in creating the institutional mechanism for these IPRs. So for all these things, we needed to develop human capital, and for this also, this particular IPR policy becomes very, very important. So it would help in what? It will help in strengthening and expanding the human resource, institutions and capacities for teaching, training, research, skill building in the field of IPRs. Then after that, what are the highlights? And again, highlights again will be derived from the objectives, because what will the highlights do? They will simply try to fulfill all the objectives that the IPR policy has. Now let's have a look at some of the highlights of these policy. And again, highlights can be derived from the objectives, and highlights are on those lines. So first highlight, for example, is that this policy emphasizes on providing financial support to relatively less empowered groups of IP owners or creators like craftsmen, farmers, weavers, and artisans through financial institutions like rural banks or cooperative banks that offer IP friendly loans. And we discussed about that all the marginalized people who cannot think of applying for IPRs, don't even know of what IPRs are, now they come under the framework. They will be provided with the knowledge, they can be helped whenever they need to file for IPRs. Then the Department for Promotion of Industry and International Trade, that is DPIIT, which was known as DIPP earlier. This will be the nodal agency for looking after all the IPs being generated in India, plus all the ministries. It will coordinate between the ministries. It will act as a nodal agency for looking after all the IPs related things in India, and also the future of IPs in India. So all these things will be done by DPIIT. Then after that, one very important point, that the tagline of the policy is Creative India, Innovative India. Then the policy shall provide updation of various intellectual property laws such as the Indian Cinematography Act, Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, then Indian Patents Act. So all these acts which are there, which were individually working, they all will come under the framework of the National IPR policy. Then after that, the National IPR policy will also provide financial aid to develop IP assets through linking with financial institutions such as banks, venture capitalist funds, all these things, rural banks, angel funds, all these things. It will also provide the support mechanism, the financial support that is required. Then the policy will very closely also look after the generic drugs issue that we have been facing, and we'll discuss more about the problems that we have with generic drugs. or how we have been tackling the world against the use of generic drugs, or rather how we have been tackling the world when it comes to generic drugs. And then the policy will also be reviewed after every 5 years to keep pace with further developments in the sector. So that's why holistically you can see there are a lot of points which are beneficial from the point of view of IPRs in India. So that's why what are the benefits that will be taken out of this policy? The interest of right owners shall be safeguarded along with wider public interest. This shall help in combating infringements of intellectual property rights. Then reduction in window for trademark registration has helped in reducing huge number of pending applications in India's patent offices. Then after that, it provides multiple direct and indirect tax benefits which are available under various laws. Then after that, then it will also cover music, films, etc., and properly handle each and everything related to copyrights in India. Apart from that, even the newer areas, for example, semiconductors, things related to electronics, all these will be covered. Computer programs will be covered. So we will get a holistic idea of each and every part of traditional knowledge digital library that is being generated in India. Then after that, it also encourages for improving access to healthcare, food security and environmental protection. And then because of a good IPR policy, we'll see that more foreign investments can also come in India, because they know that any product or any process that is being developed in India, it will be safeguarded under the policy. So that's why many of the investors will be inclined to come towards India and invest in India. Then again, it will provide strong incentive. There will be a lot of important aspects. For example, it will help in economic growth, it will help in social growth. For all these aspects also, it becomes a very beneficial policy to have. Then also it will lay down a future roadmap for intellectual property in India, and also puts in place an institutional mechanism for the implementation, monitoring and review, and something that will be done by DPIIT. The policy also incorporates some of the best practices from across the world, and it has made it a part of the IPR policy of India, so that all the best practices can come in one place and it can help the IPRs in India. So these all things that we have discussed, the need, the objectives, the highlights, and the benefits. Basically, all these things that we have discussed, they all can come as a single question. What was the need for IPR policy in India? What are the salient aspects or salient features of IPR policy in India? What are the benefits that we get out of IPR policy in India? So all these are the various ways in which a question in the mains examination can come. So that's why all these points that we have discussed under various brackets, various headings, they all become important for your mains examination specifically. So that's something to remember, that why IPR policy was required, and it completely adheres to the TRIPS agreement as well. So it's not that it's an independent policy and we have just made it and made life difficult for the world. It's nothing like that. It completely adheres to the TRIPS agreement also. So this is a brief on intellectual property rights, the policy on intellectual property rights in India. Now, next we need to understand what are some of the challenges that India is facing today with regards to the IPR policy and IPRs in general in India.